This morning is an open critic of the Fed, famously calling for an end to the institution. As we get ready for this week's two-day FOMC meeting, we're joined by Dino Coase. He's a former executive vice president at the New York Fed and managing director at Appletonian Associates. And, of course, our guest host is Ron Paul. Thank you for being here this morning.
Good morning.
There's an article in today's New York Times, and I want you to react to it. I actually would love Steve's view on this, too. It says, Bernanke has tried to speak more clearly and more frequently than his predecessors. He's lectured college students, met with members of the military. He holds his quarterly news conferences. But there are now reasons to doubt that this effort of increasing public understanding is working. And he says that some say, that the article says, some say the increased volume of communication is actually creating a cacophony rather than clarity, and translating the Fed's actions and pronouncements for investors now is turning into a big consulting business for a lot of people. Has this worked? Do you think you have any better understanding of where the Fed is headed than we did before?
Well, look, you know, it's true. The Fed is speaking a lot more. The chairman is speaking, whether it's 60 Minutes, whether it's college students, whether it's press conferences. You know, we're hearing so much more from the Fed than we had in the past. You know, Steve will remember, until 1994, the Fed didn't even announce its policy actions. You know, you had to read it in their open market operation. So there is a lot more communications going on. You know, I think what people have to understand is that the Fed doesn't necessarily have, nobody can tell what the future is going to be. And people always want to know, well, what will the Fed do in 3 months and 6 months? And the Fed doesn't know what it will do in 3 months or 6 months. And so it's that basic frustration thing that people have.
So is the communication helpful then or hurtful ultimately?
Well, I think what I would say is it can hurt. Right? It can hurt, you know.
It can. You're saying
it cannot. I think it cannot. Okay.
Ron Paul may disagree with you, but I don't know.
We'll hear that. I'm sure he won't be shy about that. You know, and I think, the thing about Bernanke is that if you go back to his days as a professor at Princeton, he was always very big on clarity, on transparency, on communication. So he's living up to, the tenets that he had espoused before he was at the Fed.
You believe there's no transparency to this system?
Well, there's a little bit, but there's a lot of deception going on. You know, just recently, I think it was Dylan Ratigan demanded some more paper, and on the Freedom of Information Act got a bunch, but he tells me 60% or so was redacted, so the information you're really looking for. No, I don't really think so. I think where they're the most protective is probably on foreign transactions. And, there was a lot of foreign transactions going on in these currency swaps, and there's a lot of benefit. There's a lot of shenanigans going on there, and we did it, 4 or 5 years ago, and we're preparing to do it again. We're very much involved in currency swaps in order to, I see it as punishing the American people at the expense of helping other people, banks that might own the Greek debt and European debt. And when you look at the large people, well, we got to protect the system, but there's always somebody who has to pay. And we see that this is too often, whether the derivatives and the mortgages were bought out for the people who were going bankrupt, the Fed owns them, but indirectly that's the people, because it further undermines the value of the currency, and this hurts people. So we see it only a transfer of wealth where the rich get bailed out and the poor, and the middle class is getting smaller and they're getting poorer. They lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So that is our concern, that it serves the interest of those who get the money first. And if they get into trouble, they get the bailouts. And a lot of people agree with that.
I think, on the question of, there's a lot of controversy, obviously, about bailouts and who should get the bailouts and who shouldn't. Now, Congress has actually acted to constrict what the Fed can do, what kind of lending it can do with Dodd-Frank. The kinds of loans that the Fed made to, let's say, AIG, it cannot do. It can only
this as the Treasury's
and that's only for broad programs that are open to everybody. So, Congress can take steps to limit what the Fed can do, and in fact, it has done that. The Fed has to live within the democratic process, right? And it can do what the Federal Reserve Act allows it to do, and Congress can act to restrict that. Again, which it did do.
But they came up with all kinds of new tools that nobody had really thought of before. It's not just the idea of tinkering with interest rates. Beyond that, there was quantitative easing and different types of policies, even this Operation Twist, that probably nobody was thinking about when they came up with the Federal Reserve Act.
The Federal Reserve Act gives the Fed broad objectives, and then the Fed has instruments within those to achieve those objectives. Now, the Congress can always act to change the objectives. They have not done that. It's since 1978, right? In fact, it's not a dual mandate. It's actually 3 mandates. It's maximum employment, it's price stability, and it's modest long-term interest rates, which people usually forget about. So you've got these broad objectives, and then you've got instruments that the Fed has, reserve requirements, purchasing assets, setting interest rates, et cetera, right? And then the Congress can act to restrict that if it thinks that the Fed's misusing those. Basically, that has not happened.
But so often they can get around that. Say they don't want or not allowed to give a direct loan to a bank in Europe, but if they do a currency swap and then the central bank goes and does it, it's indirectly, it gets mixed up. That's why the audit is so important, because they can hide these things. It might not be direct, and technically they may be following the recommendation or the law of the Congress, but believe me, there's plenty of room to get around, or otherwise we would know all these things.
Why do you think Ben Bernanke is doing things that benefit banks and hurt the middle class? Does he like banks more than the middle class?
I've asked both Greenspan and Bernanke this question, and it wasn't it wasn't a sharp conversation at all. And it has to do with, why do you keep interest rates so low? And hurt the people who want to save, the people who are frugal, the people who have a CD. Maybe the interest rates, see, I believe in market interest rates. I don't believe in this managed economy by manipulation of interest rates. So if somebody's retired, they save their money and they have a $100,000 CD and they make 1%, and the market says they should make 6. I asked them, why do you penalize them? And they said, they admit that is true. They said, that's what you have to do because you're saving the system. You have to preserve, financial stability. And I care about the fairness to the people who might save, because I want the market to work. I want allocation of credit by savings, not by somebody creating money out of thin air and giving it to their friends in a secret manner.
We got to leave it there, Dino. We're going to have you back. We'll be both back to continue this dialogue. Appreciate you both being here.
This is the substance of the debate right there.
Right there.